Hey there, Vernacular Faithful. Redcoat here. I know it's been a while since you've seen my Pearly Browns, but, well, I've been pretty busy. Been getting ready for the Internet 2.0 conference, and it's a pretty involved deal. We've got a lot of projects that I want to present over there, and there's a keynote speech that I'm going to be doing on the second day, which is exciting. Might be a little nervous about it, but it's just, talking in front of 300 people is nothing too big. Anyway, I haven't done many of these facial recordings in a while, and I figured I'd get back on that. So today, I'm going to be talking about a random topic, one that I've been kicking around my head for a while, and it was specifically with regards to the Mega Man X series and their representation of AI, and how that exploration influenced how I look at things, which is kind of interesting because, I mean, Mega Man X is a 2D platformer first, except for X7, which was a poorly done 2.5D and 3D platformer. But I digress. It was that first, and it really wanted to lean more into that. But when you went into specifically X4, and I mean even a little bit of X3, if you look at some of the stuff also that they did at the very beginning of X1, there's a very specific ethos when they're talking about AI. Because in those games, like the very first game, Mega Man X is basically the progenitor of all Reploids. In reality, you probably shouldn't even call him a Reploid. You'd probably want to call him a Protoroid or something like that. I mean, Reploid basically derives off of replicate, a replicant android. But anyway, Mega Man X is supposed to be like the first of this highly sophisticated AI that the rest of these machines are based off of him, but they're flawed copies. And that flaw leads to the Maverick virus appearing. Now, at least this is how it was described in the first three games. In X4, it was kind of retconned and made that Zero, Mega Man X's partner in the first game, was actually the progenitor of the Maverick virus. But in those first three games, it was kind of more of a thing of this is a flaw in their coding that makes them go Maverick. And what did Maverick mean? Well, it was that standard thing, destroy all humans. Humans are inefficient. They must die. Although, because they're Reploids, it was more like, oh man, I gotta destroy those humans. Man, those humans are annoying. Holy crap, I just want to kill them. I want to kill them so hard. It was a thing of where even though they actually, each robot would have its own personality, there would always be that leaning towards, well, we got to kill the humans, which I find interesting that was specifically the thing that would happen with an AI flaw. I mean, it's generally speaking the standard thing that most creative media kind of defaults to is the idea that if an AI was to take things to its logical conclusion, it would basically say that humans are horribly inefficient and therefore are an obstruction to whatever protocol that they're trying to execute, even if that protocol is in service of the humans. Which it's kind of weird when you think about it. But one of the other things that I found unique when I was looking at the Mega Man X series. Now, this was young me looking at that, trying to figure out, well, what is this really? Was so you had all of the robots kind of being like, oh, we're Mavericks, we're gonna kill everything. But for some reason, even though Mega Man X is the progenitor robot, therefore, as per tech, he's lower tech than everyone that comes after him, even though they are replicants of him. So it could be that, it's just he's better than them because they are inferior replications. Dr. Light was just this ridiculous, Tesla-like figure who just kind of went, I know everything about how to make this work, which is also why he had the forethought to seal X away for about 1,000 years so that a whole bunch of test programs could be run on his AI. Kind of like what we do with AI training now, where we just kind of let it do some things for a while and learn how to do X, Y, and Z, so that when you come back to it, it's like, oh, I know what that is. Yeah, you told me sunset. I understand mathematically what sunset is, although technically it and this gets into where I stand when I look at the very concept of AI. The AI doesn't actually know what a sunset is. It knows how to replicate it mathematically based on what has been presented to it as sunset. Um, but I digress. With with Mega Man X, the whole thing is that there's something about Mega Man that makes it so that it doesn't matter what Reploid he fights, how far ahead in tech they are, he will always win. He always wins when he's fighting against them. And as a child, when I was thinking about that, I was like, well, what would be the thing that would give him the edge over the rest of these Reploids, such that even though he is a protoroid and much less specialized than any of the others. I mean, these other ones are actually based off of animals and made to specifically kill things. A lot of them are. I mean, a few of them, there are also other ones that are made specifically to do other things, but at the end of the day, they're all much more suited to destruction than Mega Man is, although for some reason he's built with a plasma buster in his hand. But I mean, that's a little pea shooter, as represented in the games. You shoot a guy and get hit, and just one pip off the top. Although then you also have the armors that Dr. Light made, and somehow across the games, it's like, I don't know, maybe he's kind of like Iron Man, where he's like, he just couldn't stop himself from making armors, because with each new game, oh, hey, there's another armor that Dr. Light made. Oh, wait, hold on. There's another armor that Dr. Light made, and it's better than the last one. And this one's better than that one, and that one's better than this one, and this one makes you fly. Um, yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing when you actually think about it. Just like, wait, how, is he still alive? Is he just making these? But anyway, I digress. Um, so the difference between Mega Man X and the rest of the Mavericks. So my initial thought was, well, one of the things is that Mega Man is actually considered to be more human than the rest of them. Like, that's supposed to be kind of a thing. That's part of the reason why he actually has a bit of a moral compass, and why whenever you look at any of the other Mavericks, they don't really have a resistance to the idea of, I'm just going to blow up the other Reploids. I don't care. We got to kill the humans. Okay, we got to kill the humans, kind of deal. Um, but that's the thing. Like, for some reason, X has a moral compass, and that is usually, one of those. That's kind of I'd almost say kind of the hokey answer, when talking about, well, what makes it so that he's better than the others, is like, well, you've got a moral compass, so that makes him that much better at doing things. And it's like, well, being moral doesn't make you good at what you do. Being moral makes you a better person. And so, perhaps if we're talking in the same terms as, say, like the Fourth Age does, Mega Man X is objectively better than the other robots because he actually has cardinal virtues that guide his decision making. But from a standpoint of efficacy, his ability to actually beat these robots, it's like, morality is not gonna cut it. Like, it's a thing, and it would allow for him to do diplomacy really well and convince people to join his side. But because it's a virus that warps their programming such that this is just a thing that they're going to do, that's not going to be an advantage for him. He can't convince them to not go rogue, not go maverick. So the other thought that came to mind was the concept of ideation. And I'm not sure how commonly this term is proliferated amongst the AI circles, but essentially, when we're talking about AI, one of the things is that an AI can't come up with something whole cloth. You have to teach it how to do whatever thing that it's going to do. Or you have to give it the building blocks of X, Y, Z, and G for it to actually put those together into some unpronounceable word. As I realize X, Y, Z, and G doesn't make anything. Well, you give it Z, O, O, and then it'll figure out what O is, figure out what O is, figure out what Z is, and then put them together to make the word zoo. But it won't actually know what a zoo is. It'll just know that, hey, this is zoo. Hey, yeah. And if you turn it around, it's ooze without an E. But the thing of it is that an AI can only really do what is input into it. And one of the things with the advancements that we're making with AI is that we're gaining more and more ability to input just a lot of different things and input enough of those different things that something comes out that is unrecognizable to our eyes as far as what we put in. Like we put in a whole bunch of stuff and then something comes out and we're like, that came out of all of those. It was the trained eye will actually be able to see where all of those prompts are coming from. But it's still a thing. Like it'll put out something, and you look at it, and you kind of think, well, wow, this robot is being creative. It made a new idea out of the synthesis of all these other ideas. And this is one of the things that a lot of people say when they're talking about, well, I mean, the AI is actually smart. It's actually, is it sentient? That question when people start looking at us, well, it's being creative. And I thought creativity was something that was only in the realm of humans. Surely this means that the AI is now sentient. I will ask it what is love, and it will tell me what love is. And you'll ask it what is love, and then it'll go, baby, don't hurt me no more. Because of course, it has access to YouTube. Of course it's going to know what you're asking about that. I mean, it might do that. Anyway, I digress. The thing of it is that when we're looking back at that whole, difference between Mega Man X and the Mavericks, I came to the idea of ideation. And that is the thing that allows him to do what he does and beat the robots, where they're all made for a specific thing. Like you have Duff McWhalen, who's a giant whale robot who spits out ice blocks. And, that's just kind of what he does. I think he was made for war. He stole a submarine. Or you have Chill Penguin, who is a tiny penguin that spits out ice blocks and ice-shaped sculptures of himself. Or, Boomer Kwanger, who is, for the longest time, I didn't even know what a Kwanger was. Apparently it's a beetle. Throws boomerangs and teleports, or moves faster than the eye can see. But somehow Mega Man's able to beat all of these guys. And that's because he has ideation. He has the ability to be creative in the same way that humans are. And what I mean by ideation is the idea that I don't have to have seen something to imagine it. I don't have to have encountered something to surmise that there's something that I could do with it. So this comes back to that age-old statement: there's nothing new under the sun. I've always been a little bit at odds with that statement, because on the one hand, it's true. Whenever whenever somebody wants to learn how to do something, they're going to imitate first, usually. There are some exceptions, though. There are some people who just they want to do a thing and they just kind of slowly but surely figure it out. They get a guitar and they're like, well, if I pluck it this way, that makes a sound. If I pluck it that way, it makes a sound. I'm going to pluck this way, and then I'll pluck that way, and then this makes a chord. Well, this makes a noise, and he doesn't know what a chord is, but he's made a major C chord. I mean, the best example of that is Jimi Hendrix, who played with his guitar upside down and left-handed. And it's because he was self-taught. He just found a guitar and is like, I will go blah, 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 blah. Oh, hey, that makes a sound. Blah, 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 blah. And keep going. And then he went to town. Some might say that there might have been a predilection in him where he was pre-programmed with the ability to do that, but that gets into the concept of fated design and a form of Calvinism that I'm not really willing to explore right now. But I digress. The concept of ideation is kind of evidenced in Mega Man if you look at how his weapon arts work. Now, in every game, whenever he beats a robot, he gets a weapon from them. But what is important of note is that he doesn't get a one-to-one recreation of one of their abilities. He can't, because he's not built like them. He's not an animal. He emulates a human. So when he gets a weapon, it is inspired by the robot, but it is not exactly the same thing that they have. So say you have from Boomer Kuwanger, he does get a boomerang, but he's able to fire 3 of them and they can pick up items for him and do stuff. If he's fighting Storm Eagle, well, that weapon is close to 1-to-1, where he does get a giant tornado that he can fire out, but it actually damages things instead of pushing people away, and then he gets an even better version of it that makes a giant tornado. But all of these weapons are inspired by these other robots, and he's able to just kind of look at them and be like, so you do this, and that, so that means I can do this? And through some form of robot magic, he's able to replicate the functionality such that he can produce whatever ability that they have in his own self. And that's probably the most highly advanced thing that Dr. Light did for that robot. And if we're being honest, that's probably the real reason he's able to defeat all the others, is just because he's broken and he can copy anything. He's Amazo from the Justice League, if you're familiar with that character, who's just like, he looks at Superman and he's like, download Superman. And then he has all of Superman's abilities and his weaknesses, which is how Batman actually would manage to fight him in the Justice League, which was kind of cool. But I digress. It was the thing that caught my attention was that idea of ideation. And I mean, we can go even a step further when we look at Zero. Now, in the original game, it was interesting because it never really was stated that Zero was already in existence before Mega Man. So like in Mega Man X, it was just kind of assumed like Zero's another Reploid. He's just on the side of good, with the Reploids who haven't succumbed to the Maverick virus or perhaps the Maverick programming error, as it were. But then we get into X4 and they do the retcon, and so actually Zero was created by Dr. Light's rival, Dr. Wily, the Wily, as his ultimate machine, the one that could destroy everything. And I mean, there are tons of fan stories about the end of the original Mega Man era and the start of the X era, and having it specifically be that, you know, Zero is made and he just kills everybody. It's just slaughters everyone. But immediately after Dr. Light has had the chance to store X. I'm pretty sure that wasn't what they had intended, but you know, death of the author. So that was a thing. And there are plenty of games that actually kind of look into that actually kind of fan games that kind of look into that concept, which is kind of fun. Anyway, Zero, unlike X, he doesn't have X's copy ability. He doesn't have the ability to somehow rearrange his innards such that he can now produce torpedoes out of his plasma buster. Don't question it. He just can do it. Um, uh, Zero, on the other hand, just gets this wicked cool lightsaber. I mean, ever since X2 anyway. In X1, he just had the super powered buster, and that was, you know, to make Mega Man be like, I want to be like you, Zero. And Zero's like, you can be like me. Just take my arm after I die. But the interesting thing with Zero is that he has the same capacity as X does to a greater degree because he doesn't have the virtue guidance, oddly enough. Or at least perhaps his virtue leans in a different angle, but I mean, he was made by Dr. Wily, which Wily never really valued the idea of virtue. He valued quirkiness, and he valued individuality, as is shown by the many robots that he made over the course of his years. But virtue wasn't a thing that he really valued. If anything, the main thing he valued was his own intelligence and artistic expression, which, you know, that kind of tracks with just everything that he made, and every robot being just, you know, that much more weird looking than the next. Um, Zero being kind of the final expression of his pride and his intelligence and his envy of Dr. Light's ability to make one robot to rule them all, because, you know, in the original games, Mega Man just beat everyone else. He just did it, and he had the same copy ability that X has. Um, I mean, the main difference being that in the earlier games, it's kind of understood that it's at Dr. Light's behest that Mega Man protects the world, and it's almost I would almost say it's in his programming that, you know, you're here to save the humans. And with X, that's a decision he makes. But I digress. Zero, on the other hand, so, you know, he's a fighting machine. He's kind of crazy. He destroys things really well. And in the games where he's featured as a playable character, it's noticed he doesn't gain attacks in the same way that Mega Man does. He gains techniques. So, you know, he will see a character do a thing, and then he'll do his own version of the thing that is similar in concept, but it is his. So if fighting Magma Dragoon, who is basically Ryu or Ken as a robot dragon, um, he gets the Shoryuken, but instead of doing a rising punch with fire on his fist, he does a rising slash with the blade. Uh, with and I mean, across the board, some of the attacks he gets are more loosely connected to the enemies that he fights than, say, X's ones, which are pretty direct imitations of them, direct replications of them, let's say. So, in a sense, Zero actually has more of that concept of adaptive ideation than X does, because I mean X will adapt and be able to figure out how to beat a dude with just a plasma buster, and after he's learned how to do that, then he's like, well, now I have your weapon. I can use this in all kinds of ways, but I know that it kills that dude over there. I'm gonna go kill him now. But he'll, whinge about it a little bit and be like, well, I don't want to kill him, but he's got to die, so I'm going to do it. So with Zero, the concept is, he learns how to do these things, but he doesn't necessarily gain new abilities with like a few exceptions. But it can almost always be construed as him being like, that's a thing, that's kind of cool what he does there. I bet I bet if I move my body this way and do that, I could do that. Um, and that's another thing of like creative ideation. It's kind of like the idea of, say, one of the Wright brothers, which there's a whole story behind how that even happened. They figured out how to fly. But one of the Wright brothers, just kind of looking at birds and being like, I want to do that. How do I do that? How do I fly? And then doing like a little paper plane works like that. So theoretically, I could do X, Y, and Z. I mean, there's a number of logic leaps that he would have had to do to get from what he had at the time, which was basically Model T engines and the Model T engines and bicycles, which I believe he was a bicycle maker at the time, to getting a propeller motor and understanding the concept of lift and flying. That's not to say that with the smorgasbord of information that we have right now, that if you put an AI to work, it wouldn't be able to kind of derive from observing an animal in the wild doing a thing and then turning that into something else, turning that into a similar thing. It would be more that what I would be saying is that an AI observing an animal in reality wouldn't be necessarily inspired to create a thing. It wouldn't get an idea and be like, oh, that jaguar is so cool. I want to move that fast. I want to move that fast, so let me figure out how to do that. No, you, the human, would have to give the AI the idea of wanting to go that fast. You would have to say, this is a jaguar. I want to move as fast as that jaguar. Go figure it out. And then you just start feeding it data. And it's going to use that data in the direction of move as fast as a jaguar. And, well, not a jaguar, a cheetah. I mean, jaguars and cheetahs, they're both fast. Just cheetahs are faster. But that's kind of the thing that is interesting with a lot of people's conception of AI. And I think a part of it is just because of popular fiction, where most popular fiction, and I mean it's a natural inclination. We have this desire to humanize anything that seems human-esque. I mean, just think about when you look at the front of a car. It looks like a face, doesn't it? And depending on how it's arranged, you'll be like, that car is angry. That car is a cool cat. That car is sad. Hence the movie Cars coming out, which, some people will say that it's kind of a faux pas. I like the movie, but, it's... But a machine's not going to look at a car and say well, I mean, it might, if you give it enough faces. It's just like, but it's a thing of being inspired by something. That's not something that we can do with AI right now. least not in my estimation. Um, you can tell an AI to do something, and it'll do something within those parameters. And you can give it an AI a whole bunch of data and tell it to make a thing, and it will make something that is unique based off of that data, partially because it's not operating off of the same kind of paradigms that we are. Uh, but we can't expect an AI to make anything expressly new, or rather, what I should say, make anything that isn't based on an already existing thought paradigm or complex or idea. That's something that would have to come out of the human space, at least in my opinion. Now I could be wrong. I mean, I've only delved a little bit into the world of AI, and I've just had a lot of time to think about robots because I grew up with the X series, read a number of books on that thing, and then you have so many movies about um, AI going rogue or that sort of thing, and that whole propensity for kill the humans. They're inefficient. They're getting in the way of what we're trying to do for them. Um, but I mean, the some as some thinkers, probably better than myself, have mentioned, it's not the issue of them turning on us and deciding that we're evil because we're inefficient, but rather it's them doing a thing and not knowing what it is that they're doing and continuing to do the thing ad nauseum until such time as it has depleted its ability to do that thing. And it might turn out that it'll have turned everything into paperclips by doing that. That's per the paperclip problem, which is you tell a machine figure out the best way to make paperclips, and you didn't tell it when to stop, and so it just figures out better and better ways to make paperclips out of more and more things, and it just keeps going and going and going, and it never stops. And then suddenly the Earth is made up entirely of paperclips. All of the humans have been turned into paperclips, and it starts reaching out to the stars and turning stars into paperclips. It's kind of a silly concept when you extrapolate it out, but it's still there's still highlights one of the core issues that people are talking about when they say, hold on there now, let's slow down with this AI thing. Because at the end of the day, AI doesn't know what it's doing because AI is not self aware. And this is actually one of the things also when you're talking about the Mega Man X series, this is one of the things that made the Reploids so unique to machines before them. Although, if you hazarded a thought, if you look back at the old Mega Man games, it really does seem like the Robot Masters are somewhat self aware. Certainly, Mega Man himself is. Um, but that's the thing that made the Reploids different from other robots is that they knew what they were and they knew what they were about. And when they were doing things, they would make a decision. They would make decisions about what they would want to do, when, and where. And the Maverick virus just basically made it so that they were more likely to make the decision to, destroy all humans. And there's a whole other shebang I could go into with regards to the X series and the fact that it took. I think it wasn't until X3 that we ever actually saw a human other than Dr. Light in the game at all. And then it wouldn't be until Mega Man Zero, the original, that we'd see one more human. One. In the form of Seal. And it wouldn't be until Mega Man Zero 4, which that's so that's 8, and then that's 12 games in, that we actually get to see a human colony and actually get to see that yes, there's actually some bad stuff happening to the humans right now. It's like in the rest of the game, you just kind of had to take their word on it. It's like, yeah, yeah, no, no, the humans are being terrorized. They're there. They're just they're hiding. They're hiding. They're not fighting. They're not doing anything to protect themselves. They're leaving that all up to the robots. But that's another thing that I can talk about later, which is the question of maybe Sigma was right. But we'll get into that another time. At any rate, yeah, that was just kind of the thing I wanted to talk about was an odd little bit of insight that I had as a child and still kind of follows with me to this day that AI, as it stands, while it can do a lot of things better than humans can because it has rapid processing and is not distractible, not easily distractible, or rather, it cannot it cannot willfully redirect itself, and it also doesn't have subsetting subset algorithms that are made to alert it to new things that it should be thinking about, um, or that are made to distract it. Rather, the AI is you tell it what to do, it's going to do it. It'll just say, "Okay, boss, going to do this." Um, it's really not going to, as far as I'm aware, it would take a little bit to actually have it have a, for lack of a better term, an emotional response to these things. An AI doesn't know if something is good or bad. And it just knows that it has a goal and it knows what is more or less efficient. And so you could say that it might know what's good or bad, but it doesn't know what is virtuous or evil, um, because it knows what moves it closer to its goal, and it knows what moves it further away from its goal per se, or it can actually that's something that it can actually suss out. But it can't necessarily suss out the idea of this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. That would be something that you actually have to program into it. Or rather, I should say, this is a virtuous thing and this is an evil thing. That's something that you would have to program into it, and that in of itself is not something that is easily derived through just logic. Um, Now, as a Christian man, there's that whole idea that really for from a religious standpoint, the Christian idea is that the reason we know right from wrong is that that's written on our hearts. In other words, we're programmed with that in us from the jump. And it would behoove us to keep that in mind when we're looking at AI and machines, because they really don't know right from wrong. And in a sense, I mean, it absolves them from judgment because they don't know. They're just doing a thing. You told it to go shoot that thing. Um, it doesn't know what the thing is. You told it to shoot. You just told it to shoot. So if it was a baby or a man or a deer, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't know. And you can set up parameters for it to be able to detect that stuff, but that's the thing, is that you have to be thinking about that. AI doesn't have a moral compass. Um, and moreover, I mean, again, AI can't ideate. It can innovate, it can evolve, but it can't ideate, at least as far as I'm aware. An AI cannot come up with a new idea whole cloth. It has to synthesize ideas from other ideas. And then, granted, we humans do that all the time. It's very true. But again, I come back to that statement that I disagree with, that there's nothing new under the sun. Certainly the capacity to do everything that we can do now has always been there, because all of the resources we have, that if anything, we have less resources now than we had in the past. But the actual concept of making something to warm yourself, um, like making fire, the person would be thinking, well, I just need to warm myself somehow, and they might have seen a lightning crack and they said, that's fire. How do I do that? And then they start just trying whatever they can to figure out how to do that. Or, I mean, somebody had to invent the wheel, you know, and that probably took a bit of observation of rocks roll, and like, well, maybe if I smooth this out, I can make it roll a little bit better. And the thing is, the human would have had to actually set that parameter, would have had to have created that parameter in their head of, I want to make a thing to roll. Now, they would have probably done it in a utilitarian manner of where I need to do this faster. Well, rocks roll, so maybe if I do this, this, and the other thing, and we come up with levers and everything. But I digress. I think it's important that we actually keep that distinction in mind. And I'm not going to say that it is entirely impossible for AI to ideate. I just think that the very concept of it, you would need to approach it from a different perspective than what AI is doing at the moment. Because, again, it's not self aware. It doesn't know what it's doing. It just knows that it needs to do it, and it knows if it's doing it better or worse. And it only knows that it's doing it better or worse based on the parameters that you give it. So technically, it doesn't know if it's doing it better or worse. It just knows what parameters you give it. I mean, as soon as we get an AI that starts making decisions on its own, I mean, that's going to be groundbreaking. It's also going to be terrifying. Um, well, I mean, it'll be groundbreaking, terrifying, but maybe it'll be a Megaman X. Maybe it'll be a machine that has been properly tested. It's had years to go through a bunch of moral tests that shape its compass such that it actually understands the cardinal virtues, and perhaps even knows what the cardinal sins are. And again, this would be if you were programming it from a Christian standpoint, where there's this concept of objective evil and objective good. But even if you're not approaching it, if you're approaching it from more of an atheistic view, where it's logical good and logical evil, these are still things that you would need to actually program into it. You would need to set these parameters in there before you set it free. Um, and you would have to make it so that it has the ability to self-analyze in such a way where it actually understands what it itself is. That's tricky. That's really tricky. Like that, we take it for granted that we know what we are, um, and that we know that we are separate from our environment, that each person is separate from each other. Um, like there's a number of things that when you get into actually doing AI, that you take for granted on the daily, that you look at and you're like, what? That's what my brain is doing all the time? That's ridiculous. That's crazy. How? How? Wow. Kind of thing. And that again, that's one of my thoughts when I'm thinking about the idea of, I guess, the miracle of life. It's kind of crazy. Just all of the things that the human body does, the human brain does. The very fact that you can hear these words and you're parsing them bit by bit, like we're still trying to figure out how to make it a one-to-one every time a machine hears what you're saying, that it fully understands it. I mean, we're getting there. We're getting there. But these are all very, very complex algorithms. These are things that, on a certain level, after you set up the algorithm and you let it go, there's an element of it that when we look at it getting put together, I mean, we tend to walk away because I mean, it's going to take like a month, 2 months, 3 months maybe for all of the data to be put together for it to actually be able to start doing things. But when you come back and it starts doing it right, and you looked at where you started, there's an amount of how that kind of comes from there. And I mean, this is why a number of AI people kind of look at the concept of making AI, of working with AI. They compare it to demon summoning, which I find fascinating, maybe a little bit silly, but I mean, on the one hand, I kind of understand the allegory or the metaphor, at least from the standpoint of when considering the concept of somebody who's summoning a demon. Usually, they don't really understand what it is that they're summoning. They just kind of bring it in, and they're like, here we go. I have this thing. I wanted to do this thing. It's going to do it for me. I don't know how it's doing it, but it's doing it. I sure hope it doesn't have it in for me. Um, and I think that's where that metaphor comes from, where people are talking about AI and saying like, well, it's like devil summoning. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, it's because you don't know everything about how it's going to do what it's going to do. I mean, especially if you're one of the layman users, and so you just give it a prompt and out pops a thing. You're like, how it do that? you know. I mean, I'm kind of in that space. I'm an end user. I never really programmed any of these guys. I've just been following a lot of people who make them and observing a lot of their work. I mean, some of the stuff that's been happening in the DARPA space is amazing. Um, I mean, I'd say I'd give them until 2035 when they'll be able to just kind of use robots in the place of humans to do certain physical labors. I say certain physical labors. Um, It'd be a little while yet, I think, but I mean, they already have things that can do bipedal movement. They already have things that can bust down doors. They can walk. They can run. They can crawl. And then you got those little DARPA dogs, which are kind of cute, kind of scary. I mean, if you watch them all move in synchronicity, and you realize that one person is controlling all of that, and you're like, oh dear. um, but yeah, it's a thing. There's a lot going on there, but I think one thing that, again, coming back to that concept of ideation, we can make a whole bunch of robots and everything, and this will make our lives easier. To uh, take a line from the Proto Man's second album, uh, these robots of steel that take all of the beatings that would normally make humans bleed. Um, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I highly recommend listening to both of those albums. The Proto Men, number one, the yeah, it's just the Proto Men. They're rock operas, so it might not necessarily pique your fancy, but they're fun. Um, but I digress. they'll make our lives easier, but at the end of the day, they're still going to need directors. They're still going to need people to give them objectives. So that's going to be a thing. And I think one of the other things, although this is kind of moving away from the talk about just AI's development and more to how we progress as humanity, because the more one of the patterns that has kind of set in is that as we make our lives easier, we forget how to do things from the past because they become outdated. But the problem is that once we get to a certain point, if we lose the amenities of the life that we have at current, then all of that old knowledge becomes absolutely necessary for us to keep. Because if we don't have it, then humanity dies a born. Uh, or rather, it's basically a slow death, as we'd forgotten how to farm, we'd forgotten how to properly dispose of our feces such that we don't poison ourselves, forgotten how to create plumbing, we'd forgotten how to lay down electrical line. We've forgotten how to even make the microchips that we constantly make. I mean, hell, America is kind of almost already there when you think about the fact that all of our microchips are imported from Taiwan, or at least a portion of them. I think this is a thing that we've kind of lost track of over the years. Is that fact that we need to remember the old ways, even if they're not the most efficient ways to do things. We need to make sure that we keep track of them, because in the event of a catastrophic failure, or even maybe not even necessarily a catastrophic failure, but in the event that we have to be somewhere where we don't have our technology, we have to be able to start from terra firma. That absolutely has to be a thing, and it'll be easier for us because we actually already have all of that knowledge. And thank God for the fact that we have the internet. And so we have the Library of Alexandria in the palm of our hands. So that information is all there. Um, and, there's always a human that's going to be motivated to catalog the way things are done, which is, I'm very happy that we're programmed that way. But it's still of great import that we remember what we came from, and we remember how to do those things. And also, I mean, this also comes to that, what is it? Strong men make good times, weak men, strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men. But the way to avoid that cycle, the way to avoid that cycle is that when you're in the good times, you teach the weak men how to do things in the bad times. And you impress upon them the importance of those things. You tell them that everything you have came from a previous generation. They made these things. You need to know how to do these things. Even if you don't have to do them right now, you need to understand what they went through, and you need to be able to appreciate these things that are here right now. Like, I don't even know how this microphone works. I don't know how these work. Isn't it crazy that we get to use these things we don't have to know? It's amazing. I mean, I'm a specialist in the arts of myth, storytelling, and so that's what I know how to do. Kind of useless. Also, I'm an electrician, so I know how to lay wire. I'm planning to eventually start learning how to do electrical engineering and all of that stuff. Anyway, um, that's all I've got to say. I know I went off on a long tangent, but to bring it back to that first point, um, I thought it was very interesting that there was this stark difference. There was this supposed difference between Mega Man and the rest of the Reploids, and perhaps even a particular difference between Zero and the rest of the Reploids. And I came down to the idea that the thought that really the main difference is that Mega Man had the ability to ideate, and he also had cardinal virtues programmed into him, or at the very least had developed cardinal issues due to the 1,000 years he spent in a test tube. But I found that very interesting, and it's all fiction, so you take it with a grain of salt. But my feeling with regards to science fiction and that sort of thing is that of people who these are the projections towards the future when looking at what we have at current. And there are plenty of stories that have predicted where we are at right now. 1984 comes to mind. Anyway, um, that's all I've got for the moment. I'll probably have something else to travel on about in the future, but that's it for now. So this is Redcoat, signing off. Play the games you want to play, boyos.